Thank you to all the members for supporting my channel. Hello there. Genshin Impact has a lot of characters, not as much as every other gacha game, but still quite a few. As of version 5.1, we are sitting on the grand total of 89 playable characters in the game. And like with other gacha games, when you release a vast number of characters, there's a pretty high likelihood that some of them are not going to be good. And that could be for a number of reasons. It really depends on the character, their role, and what they do. So I thought it'd be pretty interesting if I made a video detailing what makes a bad character, with a few reasons. Now, not every character that I mentioned today is still bad today. I will talk about their current state in the meta if it is relevant. Some of them might be bad to this day, and for that I don't apologize. Like most of my videos, a lot of the stuff I cite comes from official meta material, or, in some cases, my own experience, because unlike most people that played this game, I've been playing it for a very long time, I followed the meta for a very long time, so I have a pretty firm understanding of what goes where. That being said, Genshin is a very interesting game, and it's very hard to make tier lists for these characters because a lot of units have very niche scenarios where they are good, so in most circumstances, there's usually one time where a character can be good, even if they're not. Example, Toma is not a character who I would consider horrible, but he's generally considered by the populace to be not that great, but he's still best in slot for Virgin teams. Does that make Toma a really good character? No. Does that make Toma a bad character? You could argue that. So for reference, in this video we will be speaking generally. With that all being said, I think I want to go down the list. First character that I think of when I think of really bad characters is Sigewinne. Now Sigewinne is nowhere near the bottom of the character ranking. She's actually decently high up there, but that's only because she's a 5-star. If we compare her to other 5-stars, she is very, very, very close to the bottom. If we're talking about limited time 5-star characters, I'd say Klee, Albedo, Sigewinne, and Eula are very, very close to the bottom. But here's the thing. Unlike these other characters, Sigewinne doesn't really have any role she particularly excels in. For example, Albedo is very good on mono Geo teams. He is the best Geo battery in the game. Eula, even though she's not that strong by modern DPS standards, she is still the best physical carry in the game. Klee, even though she's not a very powerful DPS nowadays, is still very strong, with her best team only performing about 26% worse than the best pyro carry in the game, which is currently Arlanchino. Sigewinne, on the other hand, has very few use cases unless you stack cons on her. Let's go over her pros list real quick. According to Sigewinne mains, Sigewinne is A, one of the best characters for Freeze team, B, she is one of the fast Farina supporters, able to completely heal off-field, and her ult does surprisingly high damage. Okay, but here's the problem with all of that. Assuming you are using a C0 Sigewinne and a C0 Farina, Sigewinne is actually the third best character for Farina teams. Sigewinne has the ability to heal you slowly off-field, which works for the first rotation of a Farina ultimate to keep you on full HP. However, what you could do instead is replace Sigewinne with a Jean on VV, shred Hydro Res by 40%, and then pop the burst, and then immediately get all your health back in a second instead of over the course of time. This means that as soon as you pop Farina's burst, and then pop Jean's burst, you will immediately get 86% of your max stacks, assuming you were fully HP depleted. Alternatively, you could use Sigewinne, get a whole 8% bonus damage from Sigewinne's kit, and then slowly heal back the HP you lose, which means it would take longer for you to get the full buff duration. The only downside with Jean is, on the first rotation, you're going to have to swap off of your main DPS for a quarter second so that you can get your burst off and immediately swap back to your DPS for maximum fanfare stacks. Or you could just end your first rotation prematurely, and then every other quarter rotation for the whole Abyss run, not just that floor, you can do what I said earlier and just pop burst at the start of rotation, get VV shred in full fanfare stacks immediately. And remember, Jean is the second best option because the best option for getting fanfare stacks is fucking Neuvillette. You know, the character that Farina works best with. And Neuvillette wants at least 2 other elements to react with, meaning on Farina's best team, who Sigewinne is supposed to support, there's no room for Sigewinne because you need 2 other characters like, oh, I don't know, Kazuha, and recently Zillinen, who just fucking throttled her out of the meta. Zillinen is also a healer, who can also make Furina's best teams better, while also shredding Hydro Res by 39%, while also buffing her damage by 40%. The final pro, quote-unquote, for Sejuani is that she can deal decently high damage while she's on the field using her burst. And that's true, Sejuani does do pretty good damage when she's on field. However, she doesn't do good DPS. This window takes such a long period of time to pump out all of its damage, Sejuani actually isn't really doing that much. You'd be doing more DPS if your main DPS took the field time and not some halfway built side carry DPS. Basically what I'm saying here is all of Sejuani's projected Ws are nice to have, but there's significantly better options available if you want these roles to be filled. I think that's the first thing that makes a character bad. If you are outperformed in all of your specialized roles, then nobody's really gonna want you. And before the Sejuani defenders go to the comments and point out the fact that Sejuani has a 16% usage rate, a lot of them will point to this and talk about how, oh well, actually, my Sejuani has a 16% usage rate in Spiral BiS, so she's actually really good and people undervalue her. That is horseshit, and those stats mean nothing to me, and here's why. A lot of people that say these things don't actually understand where they come from. The charts that you see that calculate Abyss usage rates only consider the people that have the character. So for example, Wriothesley is one of the least pulled characters in all time, and yet somehow he has a 34% usage rate on this chart. How is that possible? He's half of what Furina has. There's no way that many people pulled Wriothesley as they did Furina, and that's because they didn't. It's 34% of the people that have the character. And when a character performs poorly, a lot of the people that end up owning that character have a lot of investment in them. For example, Sejuani, who has some really good constellations. So it's highly probable that a lot of those people have cons on their Sejuani, and her C1 and her C2 make her worth using. But even still, 16% of 16 people is still one person. But I digress. If you bring little to the table, and you are wanting people to pull you based off being a limited time 5-star, which has the same value as other characters like Neuvillette, it's highly likely that you're not going to perform well. But there are other examples. A main one that I like to point to is a character that came out named Cyno. A lot of people say that Cyno performs like a 4-star despite being a 5-star, and that overall he's a fairly weak 5-star character, which, yes, that was true on release. Cyno was a very weak 5-star character. This is something I really like about Genshin. If you release in a poor state, you have the entire rest of the game's history to get better before time runs out. And Cyno did just that. Cyno was a Hyper Bloom DPS that released in an era where there weren't that many ways to make Hyper Bloom work. If you wanted to use Hyper Bloom before, you either had to full stack EM Raiden, use EM Kuki Shinobu, or you were going to be using Cyno as a main carry. Nahida wasn't out yet, Baizhu wasn't out yet, Furina wasn't out yet. The only proper applicators were Dendro Traveler, Kolai, and Tainari. This meant that on release, Cyno's best team was Cyno, some sort of Hydro character, usually Jingshou or Yelan, and then 2 Dendro characters, and then you wouldn't bring a healer. Or you would bring a Dendro character and some sort of shielder, because Cyno really wants a shielder more than he wants a healer. A lot of people ended up dogging on how bad Cyno was, and I will admit that on release he wasn't that good, but he has gotten significantly better since then. Being an on-field main DPS Electro character that performs somewhat of a hyper carry role while also being able to be an enabler due to his hardcore scaling and elemental mastery, Cyno has a lot of stats he wants to sink into. Attack percent, elemental mastery, crit rate, crit damage, energy recharge. He is one of the hardest characters to build, and because he came out so early in Sumeru's history, it was hard to get the proper stats you wanted on this character. Match his difficulty to be built with his team being very weak on release, it's no wonder why a lot of people just saw Cyno and was like, oh, he's dog shit, and then moved on. But Cyno got a really powerful enabler, healer, shielder, and buffer with the release of Baizhu. He gives the Dendro application you want, the healing you want, and the shielding you want, while also being able to buff Hyper Bloom damage all at once. On top of that, he also got access to Furina, who was able to buff his hyper carry damage while applying enough Hydro to get decent Hyper Blooms off. These two matched with Cyno are so powerful that you can really put anything you want in the final slot and make the team work. But that doesn't really matter. Because on release, Cyno had a very poor first impression, a lot of people just took this and then moved on with their life and never ended up looking back at Cyno. A lot of people still consider him to be similar power level to a 4-star, even though he is a very powerful, very competent DPS. And even though I know this because I follow the meta and I understand what is good and what's bad, it doesn't really matter because the general consensus has been made. It's a lot like the Kokomi effect, where a lot of people said Kokomi was shit on release, and even now that she's gotten a lot better, people still don't acknowledge her as powerful. And I'm sure where Saijuin will follow the same effect. Saijuin may not be the best right now, she may not be worth pulling, but I have no doubt in my mind that in the coming years she will eventually become more powerful. But then there are unfortunately nutcases that don't fall into either of these criteria. While Saijuin suffers from low usage and unfortunate circumstances of being a 4-star and a 5-star skin with no real niche right now, and Sino suffers from the fact that on release he didn't have a lot of good characters to work with, other characters have intermashing parts of their kit that make it so that they don't work at all. And while I could follow the popular consensus and just say, oh my god, Wriothesley doesn't work, his kit is broken at C0, I'm not going to do that because that's just not true. Wriothesley does have HP neutral combos he can do in his kit, and he does function fully with his healing at C0. It's just that a lot of people in Genshin have fucking skill issues and couldn't figure out how to do it. Other characters don't have that luxury. Kanich is a character who wants 2 Natlin characters in his kit and wants to trigger burning effects, but he literally can't do that because there's not another character from Natlin that works well with him. But that's also low fruit. What about characters that just straight up don't do their job? I talked about this character recently in a video discussing forgotten units. You can watch that if you want, link down below. But this character is made, handcrafted, to perform a very specific role, and he just doesn't do that job very well. That character being Mika. Whoopee. Mika is a handcrafted character that is entirely meant to buff one of the specific elements. We see this happen a lot. Unfortunately, Mika does not buff an element, he buffs physical, and he has a lot of problems. The main reason is his skill has too many requirements that prevent it from being dependable for buffing. On top of that, attack speed only really affects your normal attacks, so characters that get high priority from their skill or their burst, that's a damn shame. He only works with physical units like Keqing, Zhangling, and Zhongli who use the Crest Pike, which is very ironic because that means he doesn't work well with the premier physical DPS, Eula. He also has a lot of problems in his main kit like Sino, where he's really hungry for a lot of different stats, most notably energy recharge so that he can get really good burst up time. However, because of his kit and the way it works, you can't really spam it like how you want to get full uptime. He's just not a dependable character. But I already said all that in a previous video, so let's talk about a different one. How about Dori, who in my opinion is the worst character in Genshin history. Dori also has a lot of problems with her kit, and my god, they are really interesting. For example, Dori is supposed to be an energy recharge character. She is supposed to be an energy recharge battery for the electro element that applies electro for reactions, and she does none of that well. She is a battery that needs to be batteried. That's like going outside and buying some dehydrated water that you have to add water to be drinkable. Because she needs so much energy recharge, you're not able to build elemental mastery, which is what you want to do to get her electro application off like how she was intended to be built, which means her kit contradicts itself a lot like how Mika does, making it to where she's not really that usable. On top of that, she suffers from the same thing that Sino does, where she is not very good on release, and she had a really bad reputation that only got worse. She is decently usable now, but she's still dog shit. And then on top of that, she suffers from the same thing that Seijuin does, where Seijuin is outclassed by other characters that perform the same role. I'm not sure if you know this, but one of the best 4-stars in the game, especially after Dendro, is Kuki Shinobu, who does Dori's job better. Kuki only needs to tap the E skill to get consistent electro application with high elemental mastery with no energy recharge requirement at all, while being the same element, while being more consistent, while being more reliable, while healing the team, and that's not considering her burst at all. Dori is, in my opinion, the prime example of all of the failures a character can have in Genshin. Bad kit contradicts itself, weak character, overshadowed by other characters. And for that reason, Dori sees a 0% usage rate in the Spiral Abyss. That is fucking sad. And unlike Seijuin, she doesn't have the excuse of, oh, she has a 16% usage rate, but nobody has her. Everybody has this fucking character, and nobody uses her. With that all being said, ladies and gentlemen, like, comment, subscribe. See you later.